This is part 2 of the 4-part total book breakdown of how I wrote my debut book, Starlight Farm's Kennel for Talking Dogs. Link below to support the channel. Last video, I took you through every part of how I turned this book from an idea into something that we can write. And now it's time to get to that proto draft and put down some words. I'll be seeing you later. Last video, we talked about genre and characters and setting and how I took this abstract thought into a plot framework. And if you ever get stuck in planning hell, then maybe look back at that video. There could be something useful there. And if you want even more detail into the planning process, like my entire actual plot framework that I used for this book, then head over to my website and sign up for the newsletter. I'll be sharing an even more detailed story breakdown with excerpts and more through that newsletter following the release of the book on August 20th. Pre-ordering this book is the single best way that you can support this channel and the Discord. Writing Theory is all about helping you become a better writer. Subscribe and follow this channel for more content all about becoming the strongest writer that you can be. And did you know that we have an awesome Discord? It's there for you to ask questions and share your writing and get feedback and even participate in writing challenges. You can use the link below to join a supportive and positive writing community. Let's get writing. A portion of this video is sponsored by Pro Writing Aid. All right, so you've got your idea, you've planned it out, you've got characters and setting and plot, and you're ready to write, aren't you? Okay, so I guess maybe the very first step to writing is, how do you know if you're ready to write? For every person, it's going to be different. It's not like, okay, well, let me, you know what? Let's make this analogy a little bit better. Hello and welcome to Say It With Me, Season 2 Taste! The writing cooking show that you didn't know you needed. I'm your host, Carson Smoked Paprika Long, and I'm here to guide you from planning to writing. Let's talk about what we're cooking today. We have the basic chocolate chip cookie dough, and we're gonna break down how we prepare for cooking in the same way that we prepare for writing. You see, there are multiple approaches. A lot of people here may want to take their time and prepare to cook. Before you even preheat the oven, you're looking over your ingredients to your cookies. You do your research on the best kind of flour to use, the right kind of oil, the different selections for your chocolate chips, and you're portioning those ingredients out. Usually you're following some kind of recipe or framework or formula that someone else has put together. Writers who approach writing in this way are planning as much of their story out as they can before they start the writing process. And typically, writers like this are taking every opportunity to formulate a vision of what their end product is going to look like. The more planning that you do before you start writing, the easier it should be to get a strong story. But that's not always the case. You've heard the saying, an ounce of preparation is worth a pound of, wait, that's not the saying. Can you hand me my phone? Can you hand me? Hold on, folks, one second. That's, just the technical difficulties. It's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Fucking Benjamin Franklin. Should we cut it out? No, can't. Well, how are we gonna shoehorn this back? But that's not always the case. Let's look at another approach to cooking, because other cooks may have spent their time building up the knowledge of cooking, and instead of following a recipe with proportions, they cook on instinct. They know what a basic cookie dough contains. It's a certain amount of flour and a certain amount of oil and a ratio of chocolate chips. And based on their knowledge of cooking or understanding the cookie dough, they can start the cooking process before portioning everything out. Does the dough look too wet? Well, remedy that by adding more flour. They are constantly analyzing and fixing and building towards that end result. Writers who approach writing in this way are able to start writing sooner and use those instincts to correct the story as they explore it. These writers are constantly on the lookout for flat characters and poor pacing so that they can start to remedy that and work on fixing it. This is writing by instincts. So which cook is cooking the correct way? Say it with me. None of them. They serve as extreme examples. All right. Oh, we're having fun here. We're having fun. Both of these cooks can make a good cookie dough. One might rush into cooking and make some mistakes, but they're also prepared to fix those mistakes. And the other cook might have everything portioned out perfectly, and they're following a recipe, but if something goes wrong, they may not have the skills to correct it. In cooking, the recipe that you follow is to get you repeatable, standard results. Yet, for art and writing, we don't want to create that repeatable standard result. And that's why so many plot frameworks and writing books might feel a little abstract. You're supposed to bring your own artistry and execution to the formula and make something that's a product of you. And that's the hard part. Okay, so what's the answer here? I mean, what skills do you need to develop in order to start writing your book, and how do you know when to start? Well, first, don't get stuck portioning out your ingredients for so long that you never start cooking. And don't rush into cooking without doing your proper research or having that proper knowledge, or else you're gonna get stuck halfway through the process and never finish. You need to find the amount of preparation that works for you. And the only way to do that is by writing something and finishing something. Look at my last video to see how much preparation I needed to feel comfortable to start writing. Look, I wish it was as easy as add 2 characters, a setting, and a conflict and stir until combined. I wish writing could be that simple, but it's just not. That plot framework that we made in the last video is the closest thing to a recipe that we have. It gives you the order, the ingredients, and the final idea, but you still have to connect all those dots. You still need to figure out exactly how these ingredients go together, and that's the technique. If you find it hard to begin writing, then it's likely because you need a recipe to get going. You need direction. But like with any art, it needs to come from you. So how did I write my protodraft? How did I take these first steps? How did I start cooking? Let them cook. Well, watch this video and start your story with a temporary beginning. Crack a few eggs. See what happens, where it takes you. You likely have the start to your story hidden in your own eggshell, and you just need to give it a chance to come out. The hardest part of writing your book is the protodraft. It's getting your first version of that story down start to finish. It takes discipline. You have to keep writing and you have to put in the time and the effort. Let me share some stats with you. I planned my book to be 40,000 words. That was the target. I took a page from the Save the Cat framework and I put some page numbers and percentage values to my plot framework that we talked about in the last video. And I just followed some typical sort of numbers. The first act should be 25% of the story, and the final act should be 25% of the story, and the middle should take up half of the overall book. That's where you do like the real character development. But in reality, things got a bit hairy. Let me give you some stats. I wrote the protodraft of this book in 23 sittings. And some days I wrote 1,000 words. Some days were really productive and I was able to turn out 5,000 words. And the last day, writing the big conflict and the resolution, was an emotional 7,000 words. And while that was 23 days of writing, it was spread out over a month and a half or more. The protodraft finished at roughly 43,000 words. In some of my protodrafts, I might skip a scene or two and make notes and come back and fill that scene out later in editing. This is the idea of like non-linear writing. Check it out in that protodraft video. In this case though, I was able to get all of my scenes down in the first try. It's just not always the case. Again, check out that video on the protodraft to see how to overcome and fix things like that, even to fix writer's block. I went into the Protodraft with a plan, but that plan quickly went off course. And let me tell you specifically what challenges and changes happened to my draft as I wrote it. First, I start every story with a temporary beginning. It's the idea that I know by the end of writing my Protodraft, I'm gonna know the characters and the story and the theme so well that I'll want to change that opening scene of my book, because when I wrote that opening scene, I didn't know what I was doing. A lot of writers talk about how important the opening line, opening paragraph, or the opening chapter is. And that's something that you're going to fix in a later draft. So instead of fretting over it, just write an opening, get it down, and move on to the good stuff. Second, I added a whole new main character to the story that wasn't in my original plan. In my original plot framework, I had two talking dogs, Goose and Barky. And those two dogs were very different, but I found out early in my draft that the inclusion of another dog would help the story immensely, and here's why. Barky is this border collie dog who's portrayed as a serious and goal-driven dog personality. I don't know what to say there. And because of this, she was at odds with Goose, the golden retriever. He's goofy and scared of things and not very serious. And a lot of this story really focused on the journey of Barky. So I decided to add another dog into the mix that would relate more closely with Goose. And those two dogs would become best friends. And their pairing together made Barky feel more like an outcast or an outsider in this story. And that was an important part of her character journey that would pay off in the end. Additionally, I learned so much more about my human main characters, Marcus and Rachel, through writing this draft. I started the story with very little knowledge about who these characters would be. But as I wrote that Protodraft, they both kind of found their voices. Rachel became this complex protector and lofty dreamer, and Marcus, whose original character description was just, he loves his wife and supports her. Yeah, that's what his character description was in my planning. He became someone who countered Rachel's lofty dreams with realistic solutions, still supporting her, still helping her achieve those dreams, but in a more realistic way. Rachel might want to save all of the dogs out there who can talk, and Marcus might suggest they build a kennel with the materials that they have or that they can afford to save the dogs that they can. A grounded counter to a very passionate person. And this relationship grew into a really strong thing as I wrote, which then led me to situations where I could swing things in the opposite direction. Something happens that sends Marcus into a frenzy of anxiety or anger, and now Rachel helps bring him back to reality. This wasn't part of any plan that I had for these characters going into the Protodraft. I was discovering these characters and fixing them in the same way that a cook might note that the cookie dough is too wet and add some flour. And that had me adjusting their personalities to really work in the story. The plot of the story also changed a lot, specifically the climax of the story. I realized halfway through the book that there would need to be a moment where the dogs were out on their own, away from Marcus and Rachel, and that they would be saved by the things that they had learned, a test, if you will. I had a vision of the dogs protecting a child from a beast in the city as part of that big climax. This moment just popped in my head one day, and I knew that Barky would save the kid and Goose would comfort the kid. And from that scene, I started to build some narrative threads. What if Goose was the kind of dog that was scared of everything? Well, this would give him an opportunity in the climax to overcome his fear to save another. And also, I can't just have like a beast in the city that just comes out of nowhere. How can I work that into the story so that it all makes sense? So this actually had me introduce a conflict midway through the story with a creature I called a brush hog, a big tusked boar that lives in the forest. The famine is also hitting these creatures in the forest, meaning that some of these terrifying boars have moved into the city seeking food. Now I had a conflict between the dogs and the boar in the middle of the book, and then I had a climactic scene at the end of the book where they faced off all over again. All right. Okay, hey, come here. I'm gonna let you in on a secret ingredient of building tension. Maybe we should go to Chef Smoked Paprika for this though. Come on. Opa, a secret ingredient, you say? Are you sure you're willing to part with your secret so easily? Yes, chef. What am I doing? Okay, you silly fool. But first, maybe the viewer would consider checking out your book in the link below to buy or pre-order. Who knows? That could also be a secret ingredient of success. They could even thank Pro Writing Aid for sponsoring the video. Pro Writing Aid is an all-in-one editing tool to bring your writing to the next level. It's made by writers for writers. I picked up a lifetime license 4 years ago because I saw the value of Pro Writing Aid. So I was so excited that they responded when I reached out to them to talk about a partnership. You see, I want you to see how good this thing is. Pro Writing Aid is like having an editor looking over your shoulder at every point. It helps you with grammar and spelling, but also everything from sentence length to readability to full story critiques. The critique report is a full analysis of your writing that breaks down how strong your characters are and how to improve your pacing and all kinds of stuff. I like to use Pro Writing Aid as its standalone app, where I can load my entire Scrivener project and edit my story in a completely focused environment. But Pro Writing Aid also has the Everything desktop app so that you can get that incredible writing feedback on any place that you can enter text. And this means that Pro Writing Aid integrates easily with Obsidian, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, just about any other writing program that you might use. Wow. The coolest part to me is that Pro Writing Aid allows you to switch the genre of your writing, and the editing advice changes with it. Now you can use Pro Writing Aid when drafting school papers, or blog articles, or important emails, or a recipe. Ask me how I know. Use my code WritingTheory10 at checkout for 10% off of your purchase. So my secret ingredient to amping up your conflict and tension is a trick that I call more and worse. You see, in my story, I have the dogs and Rachel face off against a brush hog in the forest in the middle conflict of the novel. And then at the end of my book, the dogs are now up against 3 brush hogs and they have to protect a child. That first interaction is mainly to establish how impossible the later task must be. The first conflict shows how dangerous one of these brush hogs can be, and the second conflict uses that information to build tension with the reader. We barely survived that first encounter, and now we have to do it again, and there are more brush hogs, and the situation is even worse. I love this method of tension. I use it in a couple of my stories that I'm working on. I establish how dangerous a situation is in the best of circumstances, and then later I put that character in a situation that now feels impossible because we know how that last interaction went. That's a secret ingredient for you. Take it as you will. In my Protodraft, there's typically a couple important things missing. When I write, because I'm discovering the details of the story, I usually get to the end of the story and recognize that there are a lot of opportunities to create payoffs. These could be called any number of things: breadcrumbs, foreshadowing, setups. Basically, it's the idea that there is some sort of detail in the middle of the story that becomes really important at the end. And in the case of this book, I wrote the end and I kept notes of all the moments where it felt right to have a payoff. And let me give you an example. I wrote a scene initially that had the dogs learning these dumb little tricks. They were gonna be this big attraction at the festival in the city, so they thought they needed some kind of act. So they learned something silly like the little dachshund jumping on the back of the golden retriever and balancing, something that would be like a little dog acrobat show. And in the scene that they learned those things is presented as a mistake, a dumb idea, a waste of time. However, when I was writing the climax, I needed a way to get the smaller dog out of harm's way. And this idea of climbing on the back of a bigger dog to reach safety became a callback to that smaller scene. Now, I unintentionally or maybe subconsciously made this sort of callback, but in the editing of my story, more on that in the next part of this series, I was able to go and connect these scenes even further. Now it's an intentionally designed setup and payoff. Writing this proto-draft was a fun, rewarding experience, and finishing that proto-draft was one of those days where I just felt high on life. I had set out to do this really hard thing, and I finally accomplished it. It was even more exhilarating to print the whole thing out, and even more so when I got my first proof copy. And I want that for you. I want you to experience that and to share it with the people around you. You can check the link below to pre-order the book, and remember to sign up for the newsletter to get that free super detailed story breakdown that I wrote as I did this book. It has everything from my plot framework to the differences between my first and second and final drafts. And you can also check out the Discord and come hang out. Next week, we go over the entire editing process to bring this proto draft to the final draft. And this contains excerpts and breakdowns on why and how I changed certain scenes to make my overall story better. And as a bonus, I'm putting together a live uncut video of how I actually go through and edit my manuscript. So I hope you find this series helpful. It's really kind of beneficial for me just to get all of these thoughts and decisions out there. Helps me sort of reaffirm how I go about my process. I hope it's beneficial for you. As always, thank you for watching.